It's a famous day. It's everybody here is happy because that we will take our rights and we will establish our state here in Palestine. It will be a peace here.
We think that Arafat made a big disaster against Palestinian benefits.
Live from Washington, Crossfire. On the left, Mike Kinsley. On the right, John Sununu. Tonight, through Palestinian eyes, in the Crossfire, Bishara Bahba, member of the Palestinian delegation to the multilateral peace talks. Naseer Aruri, member of the Palestinian Parliament in exile. And in Dallas, Nihad Awad of the Islamic Association for Palestine.
Good evening. Welcome to Crossfire. At a White House ceremony on Monday, Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization will sign their historic peace agreement. But that doesn't mean there will be peace. Some Israeli Jews and some Palestinian Arabs bitterly oppose this deal. And, whether through politics or more violent means, they may be able to block it. On Wednesday, Crossfire presented the debate among Israelis. Tonight, we will look at the debate among the Palestinians. Did Yasser Arafat sell out too cheap? He got limited autonomy, not a real Palestinian state, at least for now. He got nothing on Jerusalem, which Jews and Arabs both claim is their capital. More fundamentally, by recognizing Israel's right to exist, he gave up forever the Palestinian claim on all the territory they lost with the founding of the Jewish state in their midst 45 years ago. For some Palestinians, that is still too bitter a pill to swallow. John.
Naseer Aruri, you do not endorse the plan, as I understand it. That is correct, isn't it?
That's correct, yes.
Considering the reality of where we are, not the ideal of pre-1948, can you come up with any alternative scenario starting where we would have been now that would have any realistic chance of being achieved that would have been better for the Palestinians?
Well, I think perhaps the plan itself might have been modified somewhat. It might have been predicated on different assumptions. It seems to me that the plan is really predicated on the notion, and the faulty notion, that the wrongs that have been done in this conflict were wrongs done by the Palestinians to the Israelis. You can see this, I think, in the Declaration of Principles. You can also see it in the exchange of letters between Chairman Arafat and Prime Minister Rabin. I am not actually talking about a solution that would be based on the principle of one person, one vote, although that's not a bad idea. I am talking really about two states coexisting side by side in mutuality, in parity, and in peace.
Isn't this the first step to getting that?
Well, I think
that's what everyone is looking at it as.
Well, that's why actually I am not opposing the agreement, though I want to emphasize that I'm not endorsing it, because I am not really sure if it is the first step. I think that reading the principles, the Declaration of Principles, it does say that this is part and parcel of a final settlement.
What second step would make you feel comfortable?
Well, I think that a second step would be undertaken, whereby the two parties are negotiating in genuine negotiations with a show of goodwill, perhaps the concept of redeployment, which I think is what is really being talked about here, would be considered withdrawal. I think that if Israel were to make a statement that this is an occupation, that Israel
Daddy, it is so hot you could lay an egg on the sun.
Territory, then that might be a confidence-building measure for the Palestinians.
Would you feel comfortable if the process continues to move towards the reality of an autonomous, independent Palestinian state?
Yes, I think I would feel comfortable if the process would move towards autonomy, providing that autonomy is going to move towards independence, which is what everybody else has, which is what the Palestinians are entitled to and will insist upon.
Mr. Awad in Dallas, this agreement, in this agreement, Yasser Arafat acknowledges Israel's right to exist in secure borders. Is that basically what bothers you about it?
Well, what bothers me is that the entire agreement was hyped, so the general public, even the Palestinians, do not understand what's going on. Second, it bothers me that it only covers 2% of the Palestinian land, and it ignores the rest, and there's no guarantee that an authority will be within the Palestinian hands or the Palestinians will have a sovereign state. It only talks about limited self-rule, limited to collecting, unfortunately, maybe garbage, governing themselves within administrative limited areas, and eventually they will be securing what Israelis could not secure. It also neglects the majority of the Palestinians' rights. Like a person like me who comes from a village next to Tel Aviv, I don't have any rights in this agreement, so I see it completely out of acceptance. Plus, it requires Arafat or his faction to end the Intifada. The Intifada, as we all know, is a legitimate uprising against the military occupation. So Israel would like the PLO to do its dirty job, and I hope that this Intifada or the strength that will be given to the Palestinians will not turn against its own people.
Well, now I have to show self-restraint tonight. This is supposed to be a debate about the argument within the Arab community, so I'm not going to take issue with you on various things you said about Israel, which seem wrong to me. My question, though, is this: if this agreement leads, as most people think it will, to a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza, would you be satisfied with that, or do you still hold out hope and insistence on wiping the state of Israel, the Jewish state, off the map?
Well, let's stay away a little bit from rhetoric. Nobody claims even to have the ability to wipe the state of Israel. Israel is a nuclear power. It has, as it declared, 200 nuclear bombs. Maybe the Palestinians don't have 200 machine guns. I would reject if I don't get my rights completely. And as I said, 3 to 4 million Palestinians are completely rejected, and they are getting permanent status of refugee.
Okay, let's listen, Mr. Babai. What would you say to someone who says, my family was thrown out of Israel, what became the state of Israel, in 1948. We had a home there. I still carry around the keys to the home. And now Yasser Arafat is saying my rights to that territory are gone forever.
Well, what I would say is a simple statement, which is there is a difference between what I want and between what I can get. At the present time, under the circumstances, what the Palestinians can get and hope for is a Palestinian state in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. It is true that Mr. Awad and his family came from that part of Israel right now. So did my mother. My mother came from Jaffa. My mother, unfortunately, she will not be able to go and resettle in those territories. Right now, what we have is an agreement that will lead to a Palestinian state, in my perspective, that will lead to the establishment of a Palestinian government for the first time in the West Bank on Palestinian territories. We have an agreement that calls for talking about Jerusalem, talking about settlements, talking about refugees and their return. The agreement calls for just and lasting peace to be agreed upon between the Palestinians and the Israelis. Therefore, what I see is a very important and historic beginning that is good for the Palestinian people. The alternative is the status quo. The status quo is against the benefit of the Palestinian people.
But I must say that the agreement does not really talk about the return of the refugees. The agreement actually defers the core issues of the conflict.
But it talks about the return of refugees.
It will be put on the table.
But it talks about the return of refugees.
I thought you were talking
67.
about the 1948 refugees. If it's 67, the displaced person,
but
then I would agree.
48 refugees are people who no longer live in what is now the state of Israel. 1967 refugees are ones who no longer live in what is now the West Bank.
Mr. Awad, there are other Palestinians such as you that join with you in disagreeing with the plan. What is the right approach that you and those who have that feeling should take from here on in order to try and redirect and move this process in the correct direction?
I would suggest to the Palestinian leadership to be a little bit more democratic, to respect the will of its people, not to bypass all the institutions
that is not
this
true.
agreement.
The Palestinians have not bypassed all.
Why don't we let Mr. Awad finish, and then we'll give you a chance.
If you let me please finish. The Fatah faction bypassed the Palestine National Council and the Palestine Central Council, and even some members of the executive committee of Fatah have resigned, and the whole agreement has been rushed through. And I would really question if this democracy is going to continue on this way, or the Palestinians will lose. I mean, people hope that maybe by the end of the 9th month that there will be a free election. But if we start with this way, just bypassing our people and their institutions, then we are just telling people that the minority will rule over the majority, and chaos will take place.
But that is not true. The Fatah Central Committee met and endorsed the agreement. The PLO's executive committee met and endorsed the agreement. If
Yes.
those members of the PLO executive committee that did not attend because of their choice, no one stopped them from going. They had a democratic right to go and voice their concerns and vote against the agreement. If they did not show up, then that's their problem. As far as the Palestinian people are concerned, there was a majority in the executive committee of the PLO, and the majority endorsed this agreement.
I beg to disagree, because we see on the ground that more than 11 factions are in disagreement with it. And
but 11 minute factions. Fatah is by far the largest.
That there has not really been enough consultation with regard to this. Surely the executive committee met and it endorsed the agreement, but I think that there are real problems here. You have 3 people in the executive committee who have suspended their membership or resigned from the committee. You have Farouk Kaddoumi, who is the foreign minister, and he issued a statement yesterday declaring his opposition
because he felt left
to it.
out, or because he was really opposed to the
No, I think that his statement, I read his statement, and his statement said that because of the exchange of letters between Rabin and Arafat, and because it is not really based on parity, because of the renunciation of national rights in it, that is really implied, he said that I stand opposed to the agreement.
All right, we'll give you all a chance when we come back. We'll continue with this discussion of the Palestinian perspectives on the peace plan in a moment. Welcome to Crossfire. Welcome back. Tonight we're discussing some of the conflicting views amongst the Palestinians on the Israeli PLO peace plan with 3 gentlemen who represent a variety of Palestinian views from their community. Naseer Aruri is a professor at the University of Massachusetts and a member of the Palestinian Parliament in exile who has serious questions about the plan. Also with us is Nihad Awad, editor of the Muslim World Monitor and the Islamic Association for Palestine. He opposes the peace agreement. And we have Bishara Bahba, who is a member of the Palestinian delegation to the multilateral peace talks and a senior fellow at Harvard University. He supports the agreement and says that it will lead to a Palestinian state.
Professor Aruri, World War II and its aftermath created tens of millions of refugees. Most of them were resettled, justice or otherwise, decades ago, and as a result, they were leading happy, satisfied lives. Only the Palestinians have been left in camps and as refugees to nurse this grievance. The point is, isn't it time to put history aside and let them get on with their lives?
Well, I think that the Palestinian refugees are the ones who should be consulted about this. They have rejected all such solutions. It's not that they were used as pawns by anybody. They have repeatedly rejected any plans for resettlement and insisted on their right to return. Also, the United Nations adopted a resolution, Resolution 194, in 1948, which has been reaffirmed every single year since 1948, with the U.S. voting for the majority. Now, if this cannot happen, Mr. Kingsley, I would say that Israel, at the very least, should acknowledge a moral responsibility for the plight of the refugees. Perhaps if this has been introduced into the preamble of the agreement, rather than asking Arafat to renounce so many things.
You're straining me. You're straining my commitment here. I will just say this. There are many Palestinians that did not leave in 1948, and they are now the only people in the entire Middle East Arabs in the entire Middle East who have democratic rights as full citizens. No Arabs in any other country have
Palestinians that
democratic
left
rights.
did not leave out of their own choice. They were forced out.
That is a whole
They
different
fled,
kettle of fish.
you know. So you
Some were forced out, I agree. Some were driven out. Some left at the behest of their leadership who told them to flee.
That is not true. That is a historical inaccuracy. There is no record whatsoever to prove that
we're not going to get into this. All I can say is
particularly, I think there's a number of Israelis who have produced literature on the subject.
Certainly many were driven out. Certainly many were driven out. Many were driven out. I would agree with
Mr. Awad, let me ask about what happens from here on in. The goals you aspire to, the expansion of the possibility of the plan to deal with the issues you talk about, really depends on Palestinian unity. Don't you feel uncomfortable being part of a fragmenting of the Palestinian perspective at this very critical time?
Well, I think strongly that the leadership is in the minority position. Unfortunately, the whole world is accepting the fraction of the PLO because it's submitting to the demands of the Israelis. When this leadership was resisting, along with other factions, nobody cared about them. It's like the same, with the Bosnians.
It doesn't look like it's a minority. It looks like it has a majority of Palestinian support.
Well, I hope that's true, but on the ground, I see that the Palestinians are losing, like they have been losing, and now we're just cornered, and we're just accepting what we have been offered. What we have been offered does not fulfill the minimum of the Palestinian rights, and the Palestinian leadership, should push for the national.
I have to disagree. I mean, your claims that the Palestinian leadership is in the minority is absolutely wrong. First of all, you should just look at television stations right now and see people celebrating in Jerusalem, in the West Bank, in the Gaza Strip, celebrating this agreement. I mean, what they see is the beginning of the establishment of a Palestinian state. And you cannot be sitting in Chicago or Texas and telling me that people in Jerusalem are against, and the West Bank are against the treaty.
But I would like to come in here on this one.
If I can just comment on that quickly, the Palestinian people, and I'm one of them, I would like to be very happy to reach, to a negotiated peace settlement. But you have to remember that these Palestinians who have been in the street, we cannot underestimate the strength of the media, how it can show things. It can be completely the opposite. And again, the Palestinian people do not have these details that I'm telling you, because if I was not in the journalism area, I would be like them celebrating.
I just want to say that while the leadership's position is not, in my view, a minority position, nevertheless, I think that the opposition to it cannot really be underestimated, because I think the opposition to it is coming from a broad sector.
Let me ask this: will opposition grow, or will support for the plan grow?
Well, I think
your prediction?
I think that really is going to depend on whether the interim arrangement is going to produce something for the Palestinians at the end of the day.
At that point, Mr. Bafa, I can tell you that the Israelis will never give up sovereignty over Jerusalem, whatever they may have promised to talk about in future years. Aren't you misleading your people when you say that Jerusalem arrangement from Jerusalem might be made?
And I can tell you the world will not tolerate it if they don't give up sovereignty.
I don't think that is
wrong about
I don't think that you're correct. I believe that within a 5-year period, and with the Israelis feeling confident and comfortable with the arrangements that will be worked out between the Palestinians and them, some sort of an arrangement will be made for Jerusalem where a Palestinian flag will be raised.
I think that this is the crux of the problem. When you ask about aren't you misleading, I don't know if there's anybody misleading here, but I think that the mere question that the core issues have been deferred, that means that Israel is not really ready to deal with the main issues here.
But that is not
unlike South Africa here, which has a vision of the future. This process here does not really have a vision. I think it suffers from the lack of a vision. I mean, in the South Africans do have an interim arrangement, but they know that at the end of the day, they're going to have majority rule, and that they're going to end apartheid, and that they're going to have independence.
I don't think that the core issues have been left. No one can minimize.
Deferred, you see. And I think that
no one can minimize the role of Jerusalem, the settlements, and the refugee issue. However, What we have is a roadmap toward the establishment of a
If
Palestinian
they
state.
can do it, well and good. But I'm seriously apprehensive about the fact that the Palestinians are going to sit in 5 years from now and convince the Israelis to do
wait,
it.
I got to cut you all off. Thank you. No, I'm afraid you can't. Thank you very much, Mr. Awad in Dallas. Thank you, Professor Aruri. Thank you, Mr. Bakfa. John and I may have a couple seconds in just a moment.
Mike, the disappointment of folks like Mr. Awad is understandable. They are concerned not only about the village, as he pointed out, but issues like the independent state in Jerusalem. I think the next step is as important as this first step in determining how far this really can go to a permanent peace.
I think if it turns out that the Palestinians have really had a change of heart and are willing to live peacefully with Israel, they will eventually get a Palestinian state. I do not think they will get anything like a Palestinian flag flying over Jerusalem.
Mike, Jerusalem is Muslim, Christian, and Jewish, and some accommodation of that reality has
Yes, and the first time in hundreds of years when all three religions were able to pray in peace in that country was in 1967 when Israel took it over, and that has been true ever since.
It's not just praying, it's control and authority.
From the left, I'm Mike Kinsley. Good night for Crossfire.
And from the right, I'm John Sununu. Join us again tomorrow night, or next week, rather, for another edition of Crossfire.